While Ukraine continues with strikes behind the Russian front line and Speaker Johnson wants to finally move forward with the aid in the US Congress, Ukraine itself says its perspective in defeating Russian offensives this summer is dire, is very bad. We'll talk about this and the developments along the front line in this situation report. Ukraine has once again struck far behind the front line. In Tatarstan, an aircraft factory was struck in which Tupolev 160 and Tupolev 22M are being modernized and built. The damage itself is unknown as of now, but a video shows a smoke cloud over the area of the factory, so some kind of hit was achieved. To which extent it was successful is a different story though. The Russians in turn have attacked Chernihiv, the city of Chernihiv, with several missiles. A video is showing the hits already on the an explosion that had already happened, and then another strike hitting shortly afterwards. I've published it on my Telegram. The link is in the description, as YouTube loves to demonetize every video that even just shows an explosion. So videos like this will in the future be referenced to on the Telegram channel that you can find in the description. Russian hackers supposedly attacked a number of targets inside of Poland, France, and the United States this year, including water supply and other important, like for instance, a dam. And there are other examples that could be an indication of sabotage. That is, a US plant producing shells for Ukraine has witnessed a fire, and now there was an explosion in the weapons factory that produces 155mm shells for Ukraine. In each case, it is not proven yet that it was Russian sabotage. Mistakes and accidents happen, but as of now, it seems to have at least the possibility of some kind of connection. By the way, in case I sound somewhat different and you see my cheek a little swollen, I had a wisdom tooth extracted yesterday, so I hope I won't have lost too much wisdom for the future, and please bear with me if I'm a little bit impaired today. On the northern front, we have a new report by the Ukrainian border troops that Russian sabotage and reconnaissance troop tried to cross over the border here in Sumy Oblast. According to the Ukrainians, they were repulsed. North of the Seversky Donetsk, the fighting is continuing at various points, mostly in the direction of Liman, so from more or less Crimean to the west, here in the direction of Terny. But as of now, I cannot record any change in territory over the last few days. South of the Seversky Donetsk, we actually have a successful Ukrainian counterattack. We have a geolocalization here that points to a fresh Ukrainian presence here. This is important because the Russians just had recently reached that line here, where there's a fortification on the ridge of this quarry here, and apparently the Ukrainians were able to push them back, so they are more or less back in a position here, holding that, oh, I'm sorry, that was here, holding that position, the southern flank of Bilohorivka once more. The Russians keep advancing though at Vesele. Here we have a fresh geolocalization of Russian troops advancing further north along the railroad line. They have now reached, let us recheck again, roughly the edge of that road here. So they are more or less up here as of now, marching forward, advancing along the railroad line by several hundred meters, 500 to 600 meters. They also keep advancing at Chasiv Yar, both in the north and in the south. The Russians keep advancing forward. We have another geolocalization here in the south. They have reached the last windbreaker tree line right in front of the town itself. And we have another geolocalization in the north, where they have at the very least reached the dachas in the northeast. So basically they are here and they are down here, if I'm not completely mistaken. This should be, no, it's actually here. So this is the dacha area. According to the Russians, they have entered the dacha area, but I have not seen a geolocalization by either side of this yet, and I do not see a Ukrainian admit admission of defeat in this area, so this might not be true. But even though we do have visual evidence also that the Russians at the very least are in these houses here, so they have entered the outskirts of Chasiv Yar. As of now, the fighting for the city has begun after the Russians managed to clear the northern and the southern flank, at least to a certain degree. At the same time, we have a fresh geolocalization from Ivanivske, which shows Ukrainian soldiers still in the very southwestern tip of the town. So despite the expectations that I voiced in the last situation report, it seems that at least 2 days ago, there were still Ukrainian soldiers in the very southwestern part of the town itself. Further down in the direction of Avdiivka, we have more changes, and here the Russians managed to actually gain a significant advance over the last few days since the last situation report on Saturday. They advanced roughly 4 kilometers in the direction of Ocheretine. Here, this is important because Ocheretine is likely the one of the cornerstones of the more fortified Ukrainian defense that goes along this line here. By the fact that the Russians have reached it and have actually entered the town already, this means that any further serious fortification work here will have to stop simply because the Russians are too close and are now able to strike any heavy equipment aiding in the fortification line here. So this is a serious and very unpleasant advance for the Ukrainians that the Russians managed to advance the whole line up here for a full 4 kilometers. They also managed to advance in the direction southeast of Novobakhmutivka, basically guarding their flank along that advance here, where they have just advanced along the railroad line in the tree lines there. Further south, they had success between Berdychi and Semenivka. There were, over the last few days, a few Ukrainian positions still in the tree lines here, and they now have been cleared by the Russians. Russians are, from what we see, fully under control of the eastern bank of that river here. But even more, they managed to advance even further into Semenivka itself, where we have a geolocalization here, and you have to see this is already the second crossroad where they have reached north of that triangle here. This means that they are now up to here. We've had them roughly here. We had them here before. Now they are up here. So at the very most, the northeastern part is, at best, this is still under Ukrainian control, but even the supply line coming from the west is probably already cut off for these parts, whereas the Russians keep up the pressure here. So this line is in serious danger of being cut off fairly soon as well. The Ukrainians over the last few days published 2 videos from their forces inside of Pervomaiske. I published one of them in my Telegram as well, and it's kind of weird because it shows them in the center of Pervomaiske. Once it is a raid with Humvees where Ukrainians charge in under cover fire from the Humvees, disembark, throw hand grenades into some buildings, and then just less than a minute later re-embark the Humvee and leave. So this seems to have been a raid. There's also a video showing them waving a flag, a Ukrainian flag, over the school building. So either those videos are older or they have actually been raids from the south where they just charged in, attacked something and withdrew, so that the control over Pervomaiske is actually challenged. That the Ukrainians have retaken positions in it is far from clear and still fairly unlikely at this very moment. Then we have further south, we have reports from Krasnohorivka, and here the situation is getting increasingly bad for the Ukrainians as well. The Russians have now taken a foothold in the southern Dacha area. They managed to gain positions here at the same time, and there is a new video of a Russian turtle tank that is fully box tank, where it might even be like this. It has mine rollers in the front, and you can see it's fully enclosed with metal sheets. I'm not 100% sure if the front here is closed as well, but it shows that it has jammers on top as well to protect from strikes with with drones. And the disturbing thing here is that the tank actually advanced along that road, drove in here, then drove back and drove up to here, almost crossing Krasnohorivka in full, and then was able to withdraw. During that process, it took a full strike from a cluster munition. Actually, the submunitions hit it fully, but it kept charging. Obviously, we do not know what happened to the infantry that was likely carried under that under these covers here, but it showed that even the dual purpose ammunition that supposedly is against tanks as well was stopped by this weird box shape. So despite it looking ridiculous, at least for the moment, it seems to have some credence, it seems to have some effect, actually some usefulness that is shown. That video also is on the Telegram channel where you can find it. Also, so while the Russians actually managed to advance until here, they withdrew from that area, but it shows us how serious the situation here is, how lacking the Ukrainians are in regards not just to artillery munition, but in anti-tank weapons as well. They have reached a point where they run out of this as well, which allows the Russians to keep advancing there. There's no strikes with ATGMs on them, not even shoulder-fired anti-tank missiles are being, anti-tank weapons are being used on a tank crossing deep into their rear and withdrawing, showing how serious the situation has become as of now. Further south, the Ukrainians have reached, seem to have recaptured a position in Novomykhailivka. They have been spotted here, and we have a geolocalization about this, but the video, which I can't show you here because of YouTube, shows this position being struck with heavy weaponry. I'm not sure if that was a glide bomb, but it might very well have been. So while the Ukrainians were in that position, whether they managed to hold on to that is a different story. In Novomykhailivka, the situation remains critical. The Russians are at the very least up to this point here, and they have attacked in this southern area. But as of now, the Ukrainians still hold more or less the western third of the town for this very moment, at least. Further south and west, we don't have much change to report, but the Russians managed to actually gain significant advances in the southwest of Staromayorsk. Here, the Russians managed to advance the whole tree line here for roughly 700-800 meters and managed to capture some of the windbreaker tree line to the north as well. This is getting increasingly dangerous as the ridge line is directly east of them. If they manage to capture it, if they manage to take it, then the defense of Staromayorsk and Uroshaine will be much, much more difficult as it is in elevated territory. The ridge line here and the two towns are in the river valley and thus can be dominated from the ridge line here. We've seen increased fighting about this area over the last few weeks. The Russians first managed to capture it, then were thrown back. Now they managed to come back and capture even more. We'll have to see whether the Ukrainians will be able to repulse them once again, or whether the battle for Staromayorsk and Uroshaine will start in earnest fairly soon. At Orikhiv, there's also bad news. We have a fresh geolocalization here in the area south of Orikhiv in Robotyne. The Russians managed to advance north, and we have a geolocalization here where a Russian IFV is unloading infantry in this northern part. So this is the westernmost part of town with the houses. This is the second line, and we have it roughly on that line of the crossroad going over here. So this here. The map doesn't show it fully, but this means the Russians have reached this point, showing that probably more or less this area should be under Russian control as of now. At least that seems likely. That the Russians managed to advance here, if this is still fully under Ukrainian control, seems somewhat unlikely, unless, of course, we are once more having a sign of the Ukrainians no longer even having shoulder-fired anti-tank weapons in this position as well. On the bridgehead of the Dnieper, there's some news as well. The Russian mill blogger Rovanov, who is active in this area, published an entry according to which the Ukrainians managed to gain an additional ground here, I think of 500 meters, he said. A width of 500 meters. Yes, according to him, they gained that additional ground and they did an additional landing further west. This is not confirmed as of now, and at the same time he claims that this area was captured by the Russian soldiers in their attack. So if we want to take only his admission of defeat, then the Ukrainians should control this here by now, if Romanov is right. And he has been a critical reporter, but he has published false things in the past, and this would be a claim that the Ukrainians lost something in the center. Interesting is, though, that he also claims that 80 Ukrainian soldiers are now in that position. They have, according to him, increased their strength to 80 soldiers, which would indicate that even less have held that bridgehead before. If we want some numbers here, we have some claims, at least from the Russian side. There's also fresh news from a few hours ago from the Crimean Peninsula. Ukrainians have attacked the airport at Shankoy, which is here. It's somewhat south of it. The airport was struck, and likely with ATACMS. That's at least is the guess. The observers in the surrounding areas have made videos and published them of heavy secondary explosions, proving that something on the ground was hit and blowing up. Now, right now, we only have rumors, we only have claims, according to which there might have been hypersonic Zircon missiles that have been struck. There were supposedly 24 combat helicopters, Kamov 52 and Milmi 28 on this airport, and films also shows fires in that region, so they might have burned down, but as of now we do not have any proof. There is one picture circulating around, and this is this year, showing supposedly an S-400 battery from that airport that was completely destroyed. I have not seen a confirmation that this is actually from that airport, so this might be true or might not be true. We'll have to take it with some caution. Riba, on the other hand, the Russian mill blogger, is saying not only was it an attack with ATACMS, but they claim that 12 of them were used, likely from the Kherson region. The initial one was 7 with cluster warheads, and the second one used at least 5 missiles. And according to what they say, if the missile was started from Kherson itself, it could have reached it even with the shorter range as it is, barely, but still in the 165-kilometer range in the of this type of missile. So it seems that the Ukrainians have hit something there. It seems that they have hit something that is going to be painful for the Russians, but as of now, at least, we do not have any proof of what was exactly damaged. Now let's come to the overall situation, and here there's some good news. Speaker Johnson is finally getting some movement in the US Congress when it comes to aid for Ukraine, but the exact details of when it's going to be voted on, I'm not completely sure, and he wants to split it up again into 3 different packages, but the Ukraine package is at least somewhat sizable overall, and supposedly there's going to be a vote in a couple of days. This is urgently needed, and it can't be emphasized how much it is needed, and we hear it from Ukraine itself. Syrskyi, the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces, says the situation in the east has been seriously worsened over the last weeks and months. The Russians are now doing mechanized attacks in Bakhmut, here at Bakhmut, here up in Crimea in the direction of Liman, and in the region of Avdiivka. The Russians are doing bigger mechanized attacks that the Ukrainians have trouble defeating. And he thinks that Russia intends to capture Chasiv Yar here before the 9th of May, before the victory parade, to have this as a success, which means they only have barely 3 weeks left to capture it. If he's right, we should see an intense fight for the town starting very soon. Budanov, the head of the GUR of the Ukrainian military intelligence, says that the expected Russian big offensive in May or June will be catastrophically difficult to defeat. Those are his words, if the West doesn't help in time. So Ukraine is seriously in trouble. As of now, there is no sugarcoating it, it simply has to be said. Ukraine is seriously in trouble, and obviously this is massively because of 2 things. The lack of soldiers, as Ukraine has so far been hesitant to call up more people, out of the lack of financial means, of course, and are to stem dissent in the population, and because of the lack of Western aid. That means that the discrepancy in power from both sides has widened massively. Russia is obviously trying to use the window of opportunity they have right now by the lack of aid coming from the West, mostly the US, who are the most potent player in this conflict that can decide it, can have the most decisive effect. And as the Congress has been incapable of moving forward any aid, Russia has a window of opportunity that they are using right now. Ukraine has not enough artillery to fire troop concentrations, and if attacks are happening, they also don't have the most potent means they have used in the past to defeat Russian attacks, which is their artillery. In some regions, it's only 1 to 2 in discrepancy, but in the areas of most fighting, it must be 1 to 10, according to according to voices from Ukraine, among them Zelensky. Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, also said that the power plant that was destroyed south of Kiev, which I talked about in the last situation report, was destroyed not because of the lack of air defense, but because the air defense simply ran out of missiles. Ukraine was able to shoot down the first missiles aiming at it, but then their storage was empty. They couldn't shoot at the other ones, which destroyed the power plant completely, as they are lacking aerial surface-to-air missiles. Germany is just sending its third battery out of 12, and the US have so far sent 1 out of 60. I mentioned it in the last time. Germany is sending 25%. The US have sent 1.7% of their arsenal to aid Ukraine's air defense. The spokesperson of the Southern Command of the Ukrainian Armed Forces is saying that the Russians are flying their glide bombs attacks closer and closer to the front line. Another sign of their lack of air defense, especially short-range air defense in the close regions at the front line. The Russians are able to fly closer, aiding in accuracy and allowing them to strike deeper into Ukrainian-held territories. And a Russian mill blogger was writing about this as well, that now close air support is much more easy, as the Ukrainians are lacking SHORAD and even manpads to seriously threaten Russian planes and helicopters, so they can use the full power of the air force of their rotary wing and fixed wing air force to help their advances, and the glide bombs are being used in concert with ground attacks. And he's also saying this allows their drones to fly in deeper into the Ukrainian rear to help with reconnaissance and counter battery, and it makes their own artillery more precise, basically taking out the little Ukrainian artillery they still have. And he mentions that he thinks by now it would even be within the realms of possibility that Russia could use helicopter airborne landings behind the Ukrainian lines, as the Ukrainian air defense has been weakened to that point. That we need to understand how serious the situation here becomes. This channel, the videos here are performing great when I'm reporting Ukrainian successes, and it doesn't perform. The videos don't perform. The new subscriptions don't perform when I'm not reporting big successes, but there is barely anything great to report anymore. And as I don't understand myself as a propaganda channel, there is no way sugarcoating this anymore. Ukraine is in serious trouble, and the only one who can help is the West, because we come to one more thing here. Should probably pull this forward. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry was saying that about their budget, and here we have approximately 6 billion remains for the purchase of weapons. This is the amount we have today for contracts with our manufacturers, primarily Ukrainian, and it is very small since our production capabilities are 3 times larger. So they are saying they could produce 3 times as many weapons in Ukraine itself, not even buying from abroad, if they had more money. Ukraine won't get credit from international lenders that are looking for profit. So the only money that they can seriously generate is donations and loans from Western governments. And here, if there isn't movement, then Ukraine can't even use its own defense industry, let alone recruit more soldiers, which would be direly needed, as they have to pay them. And every soldier that is being called up is no longer a taxpayer, which is making the situation even worse at the same time. So without Western help, Ukraine will lose this war. This must be obvious this must be emphasized. The situation in Ukraine is getting more serious by the day, and the lack of Western aid is fully to blame for that, as Ukraine would theoretically still be possible to call up the necessary manpower and to train them if they could afford it. The Russians, on the other hand, are facing some troubles as well. It's not completely one-sided. They right now, according to Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, they are saying that the called up conscripts that are refusing to appear are massively increasing since the fall of 2022. By now, they have 34 sentences per day regards to conscripts that refuse call up, and we are only talking about conscripts that are being not sent to the front line. They are just in the regular conscript cycle, so the morale among the younger people is seriously diminished, as those punishments are no slap on the wrist. So this is still 34 a day are being sentenced for this, for refusing to be called to the flags. And in troop generation terms for Ukraine, that's where I wanted to talk about this here. Actually, Politico wrote that by now 650,000 Ukrainian men have left the country, have fled basically the country, 650,000 men in fighting age. This has the same level as the initial flight of Russian men after their mobilization, except that Ukraine has a fourth or even less of the population of Russia. So this is serious trouble. And I have to say, just to a personal note, I have a hard time judging that if I'm not in the same position. If I'm not being called up to a war that causes serious casualties, calling people who want to save their life and their health traitors or cowards I don't think is my place to do that, as long as I haven't been in the same situation and have followed the call up. But also here, again, we need to talk about the Western aid. It's one of the reasons for that is the lack of Western aid, obviously. A lot of those who flee might still be patriots, might still be willing to fight for their country, but they do not see a path to victory anymore. They do not believe that the war will lead to a victory, and nobody wants to be the last to die in war. Nobody wants to be called into a losing battle where the only thing he'll gain is not even the aimed goal of his country, but the only thing he can get out of it is traumatization, loss of limbs, or loss of life. So a much bigger Western aid that would give the Ukrainian population the hope of actually being capable of achieving victory, which is still possible. If the Western aid comes, would help with this problem, as well as fewer people would flee if they believe that they will be well equipped in a victory, in a winning war. That's a whole different story, to refuse going into a winning war than going into something they consider to be a losing war. Still, though, Ukraine's innovation also continues. Ukraine says their naval drones now have a 1,000-kilometer range and carry 1 ton of explosives on board, so they basically can reach most of the Black Sea and increasingly do more and more damage when they hit a ship. Zelensky has now finally signed the mobilization law that reduces the age where people can be called up from 27 to 25. And foreigners, Ukraine living abroad, also have to register for the military service. Now, obviously, unless Ukraine finds nations that are willing to deport Ukrainian citizens that have a legal right to be in their country, simply to send them to Ukraine so they can be called up, this won't help too much. But I guess this will include then potential call-ups, and if Ukrainian men abroad refuse them, they will face legal repercussions, especially regarding their property in Ukraine, and probably also if they come back to Ukraine at some point. So while this will not help that everyone will be called up, some at least will probably be pressured by this to go to the front line regardless, even if they had been abroad initially. But then again, the mobilization will need financial means, and there Ukraine is in dire need. And in international support, we have some mentioning here from Estonia. Estonia says that they have found shells for 2 billion euros. What is that? 2.2 billion dollars. And in total, and those are shells they have found on the market outside of the ones the Czechs have found. If the Czech weapon delivery is fully paid for and this is fully paid for, then this year alone another 2 to 2.5 million shells could be given to Ukraine, probably more or less equalizing the artillery the artillery shortage on the Ukrainian side. But then again, apparently $2.2 billion are too much to ask for an economic bloc that constitutes roughly half of the world's economies, or half of the world's GDP, if you look at everyone supposedly supporting Ukraine, from the European Union, the European nations, to Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, the US, Canada, etc. All of those combined are roughly half of the world's GDP, and financing just those shells is so far a difficult task that has not been achieved. So I would have liked to give you better news. As said, just look at the history on this channel. Whenever I report a Ukrainian victory, I have massive growth in subscribers. I have significant viewer numbers, but unless I sell my backbone and do a propaganda channel that does it purely for the clicks, I feel like I am bound to say what I consider to be the truth, to stay objective despite, and I want to emphasize this, despite clearly being on Ukraine's side in this battle, the truth in my mind still matters, or at least the things that I find to be the truth from my perspective. If you appreciate this, I would really like a thumbs up. If you want to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. Leave a comment what you think about the current situation. And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. That was it for me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.